welcome everyone who's joined the call. Just to give you a bit of perspective, I think we're going to have a lot of new individuals on the call. We had about 70% of the registrants new to our call series. So welcome to those of you who haven't joined us before. To give everyone a kind of sense of the representation, we have a very global audience today, a mix from retail companies, some pretty large actually, to conglomerates, to financial services businesses. So quite wide-ranging interest in the topic today, and country managers, CIOs, CEOs, analysts. So a really good breadth of experience across the board. So welcome everyone to the call. And obviously it goes without a question, everyone's kind of aware of who our panelists are going to be. I will be your moderator today, and we're joined once again by Salim Ismail, a key leader and thinker in the world of exponential technology and change, having authored an incredible book, Exponential Organizations, which if you haven't read, I highly recommend it. But also having a really celebrated career up until now in the innovation space, initially with heading Yahoo's incubator Brickhouse, to various roles which are listed on this page, and then finally joined again by Cesar Castro, who's a key supporter and partner of WiderPool. He's a co-founder of the Fluid Blockchain Accelerator, so he'll be giving us some thoughts on how blockchain is affecting the world of retail. Just before I hand over to Salim, just to give you guys a bit of context why I think this is super interesting in the period we're at, is we've effectively come to a maturing stage in the access story. So we could argue that we've got a majority of the world online and connected, but most of the money is still not online. And if we just do a quick kind of comparison to where e-commerce is in the US, e-commerce has risen quite dramatically and exponentially over the last year, from say about $200 billion to $450 billion. And you put that into context of where retail spending in the US is, that's at $5 billion. So it's still got a huge amount of way to go. And I've been in retail myself, so I know that things have changed over the last 10 years, and I think the next 10 to 15 years are going to be extremely important and key for the industry. And with that, I hand over to Salim to take us through his thoughts on what's happening and how the various exponential technologies and verticals are going to be impacting retail and what we should be considering. And then we'll move on to a Q&A and hopefully have a really healthy discussion about what we should be concerned about, what we should be focused on. So with that, I hand over to you, Salim.
Thanks, Adarsh, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to run through a few slides and whip through them, and then try and leave a chunk of time for Q&A. I was 10 years ago the head of innovation at Yahoo, and I learned a really fundamental lesson there, which was when you try disruptive innovation in a legacy environment, the immune system attacks you, right? And we've got quite an interesting challenge on our hands, especially in areas like retail, where there's a very profound immune system where people have been doing things in the same way for 20, 30 years, and getting them to shift is a really huge challenge. I think the CIO of a retail chain is one of the hardest places to be today. It's got to be one of the most difficult jobs in the world, because trying to drive digital transformation at one level and still trying to maintain security and integrity of the systems at another is unbelievably complex. Early in my career, I actually did quite a bit of retail consulting. Publix down in Florida, the retail chain, the grocery store, I built a lot of inventory systems there. And I've done a lot of work in the UK and other places around the future of retail. So let me share my screen real quick, and I'm going to run through what we're seeing. Adarsh, can I overtake your screen for a minute? Let's go for this. So share. All right, so you're going to see hopefully that, and I'm going to run through kind of what we're seeing. So there's a bunch of things that we're seeing as a result of technology as a massive forcing function. Very uniquely today, we have a doubling patterns and Moore's law type symptoms, doubling every few months, happening in a multiple set of technologies, which is completely unique. In the history of the world, we've had at any given point one technology accelerating or another. Never have we had a dozen. Right? So in neuroscience, the resolution at which we can image the brain is doubling every year. In sensors, we're doubling the number of sensors. Pretty much all of you folks should be slapping sensors onto anything that moves and tracking the data streams coming off that. And it really is tough to get our heads around this. Our education, training, intuition about the world teaches us linear extrapolation rather than this extreme pace that we go at. And you look at the rise of Amazon or any of the big internet companies, and you couldn't believe that that was happening 10 years ago or 20 years ago. When we look at it from a kind of a industry perspective, almost all of the value creation that used to get in the world was through the sheer physicality of the world. You assemble raw materials, you ship things around, and so on. Then we introduced products like the Kindle or iPhone, where the product is physical, but all the revenue is digitally driven, right, and information based. And now with the rise of mobile and internet, we have entire categories that are completely digitally driven, media, music, newspapers, etc. And now cars, hotels, taxis getting information enabled. And the world is flipping around this way, and everything is going up that stack, right? Now this tends to be very, very disruptive. And I'm going to just highlight as one example of this disruption, this drone. If you go back and watch any of my talks on YouTube from, say, 2013 or so, you'll hear me excitedly say that, wow, look, a drone can carry a 20-kilo photograph of a package about 10 kilometers. That's the range and capacity. But the underlying technologies are moving so quickly, these things are doubling in their capability every 9 months. And sure enough, like clockwork, in the last few doubling cycles, we've gone from 20 kilos to 40 kilos to 80 kilos to 160 kilos. And then 300 kilos now. The scale there is in pounds. Boeing's new drone can carry a 300-kilo package. Okay? And so people who thought, oh, my retail is safe because I sell dishwashers, well, we can deliver that pretty easily going forward in different ways, right? Now, the other big challenge is going to be autonomous cars. Where the car is kind of sexy, but we're much more interested in the broader implications. We've worked out that once you have, say, a 20% or so penetration or more of autonomous cars, we'll increase the existing capacity of our roads and highways by between 10 to 15 times. Because you don't need the gap between the cars, they don't have accidents, they don't need to park. Real estate values will be one interesting casualty. Real estate spikes in the middle of big cities all over the world because it's so hard to get in and out. When it's 10 times easier to do that, what happens to real estate? All right, that'll have an interesting effect. But once you have Uber or drones doing deliveries, consider that our entire society is based on geographic proximity. Retail store locations, bank locations, voting districts, school districts, the whole thing. And so how do we predict where that goes as we light up the suburbs in very interesting ways, but now also becomes easier to get in and out of a downtown? And this will not be driven by any kind of, big technological assessment. It's simply the fact that the economics are so profound. An autonomous car is about 1/10 that of a car with a human driver in it. And so that's where we'll drive it. By the way, my favorite statistic about autonomous cars is that in the US, 50% of all legal court cases in the US, 50% car accident related, right? So now you can take out a bunch of lawyers as well, and that at least will be an interesting side effect in a positive side. Now we found that when you information enabled, you have huge deflationary dynamics. Because the first thing that's happening is the metabolism of the economy is accelerating, right? It used to take 20 years to create $1 billion marketplace. That's happening now in months. But this deflationary cliff that occurred in the newspaper business or in the music business, this is what we expect to see in other industries. And we're just starting to see it in retail. We think it's got about a 10-year run just because of the size of the industry. We find that when you information enable, you tend to see revenues abruptly stopping. We can see the banks up rate in big companies at this level. About 3 years ago, I was talking to the CEOs of Macy's and Bloomingdale's, and they're desperately trying to get their organizations kind of stepped up for this new world, but it just doesn't work to take an old structure and try and add digital onto the side of it. You have to do a whole scale transformation, and it's very hard to spot this disruption, right? The cost of LiDAR units is dropping like a million times almost in a few years. And we're seeing some incredible demonetization take place. I got a quote from my backyard to get everything wired up and put a light in it, and the quote was $2,500. And then I found a light that you stick on a wall that's solar powered with no wiring and has a motion detector in it, and a battery, and it costs $9.99. You know, so I bought 4 of them. And so you see this incredible demonetization take place as we simply don't need as much stuff, or the things that we have do a lot more, right? And I think that's a piece of it. And just to highlight that this is very hard to spot, what you see here in the black is the actual growth of solar energy rising exponentially in our favorite curve. And what you see on the colored lines are the experts in that industry predicting where it will go. And what you see here is that every single spot on this line, the experts go linearly. Okay? When you take people think about the rise of Amazon, at every single point on their curve, people have gone, yeah, that's where it'll stay, and that's where it'll stay. And people have a tough time saying it's going to double again and double again and double again. And yet it does. Because once you have an information-based paradigm where marginal costs are very low, and you have a huge, profound impact. And this won't happen again because of any magical thing. It happens because as these technologies drop in cost, anybody has access to them. So domain becomes digital, you get open source communities forming, you get quite a radical disruption in the status quo. So the big challenge, I think, for retailers, and I think there's about 3 or 4 major dynamics occurring in retail. The first is you've got this massive shift from offline to online, right? 10 years ago, people wouldn't have believed that you'd have gotten here. Today it's 10%, but there's no way it shouldn't get to 50, 60%. It's just the dynamics of the environment. And you see what's happening in Asia. The big Black Friday equivalent was literally $30 billion in a day of online sales. That's just a staggering number. The second thing I think, and a lot of this comes from a discussion I was having with Dan Murphy, who's a retailing guru from the UK, wrote a book, et cetera, et cetera. Dan has been living in this world for quite a while, and he noticed that you have all of these, everybody's trying to become Amazon, but you can't do it from a legacy environment. You have to completely create a new environment from scratch to operate in this model. The third thing is we've got huge geopolitical kind of stress as we have populism. The trade wars are starting to appear. This is going to drive up a lot of cost and a lot of uncertainty for retailers all over the world. I think the most important demographic, though, and shift is happening that retail used to be transactional, and all the transactions in the world happened in physical retail outlets. And today, many of the transactions are happening online, and the retail outlet is basically a showroom, right? And shopping malls are now social experiences, not transactional experiences. And so we're starting to see services pop up rather than products being sold in those environments. And your dollar per square foot of retail spend or retail revenue, everybody's just dropping like a stone. I think the US will be the hardest hit. If I remember the statistics correctly, the US has 6 times more retail square footage per capita than Europe. Which is just a staggering number in terms of, there's a lot of more space. But if you travel the suburbs of any big city, there's these massive malls everywhere, and people aren't using them in the same way. And I think this causes a lot of stress on the real estate side, because as people try and figure out what to do with these, the big real estate and property companies are having a lot of stress around this. So the big question is, what do you do about this? This quote from David Rose has been stuck in my head now for quite a few years. It makes the point that our organizations globally are designed for efficiency and for predictability. Right? We're trying to deliver the same widget in 100 countries and using back-end ERP systems, et cetera, et cetera. But today the world is different. You need to be architected for agility, flexibility, adaptability, speed. And our org structures simply don't match up to this. And we wrote this book looking at a totally new breed of organization that's occurring. where the world is operating in a totally different way. I'm going to highlight just one here, GitHub, which is an online platform for social development. And they use a number of characteristics in what we call exponential organizations. Microsoft just bought this company. By the way, it has no workforce, no assets, no intellectual property. And Microsoft just bought them for $7.5 billion, okay? Just think about that transition from the old world to the new world. No assets, no workforce, no intellectual property, $7.5 billion. Pretty much most companies will be built in this way. We found there's a bunch of characteristics of these. I'm just highlight the ones on the right. Uber doesn't hire its own staff. TED is using community. Google is using algorithms. Airbnb is leveraging other people's assets, etc. Just as an example, if you look at the business model and core mission function for Uber, which is to match driver and passenger, that doesn't happen inside the organization. It happens out in the wild. And by enabling that with technology, you can scale pretty much effortlessly, right? Now, the big question is, if you're a legacy environment, what do you do? And we think there's two major pieces that you have to do. First, you have to update your leadership. We are operating in a totally new world, and most leadership in most traditional retailers is coming with 20, 30 years experience in that domain. And they simply can't understand what's happening today, okay? The second, and maybe most important, is do not do disruptive innovation inside the core organization. Do it at the edge in different sectors, different verticals, different countries, and then move to that model in different ways. We're starting, you know, there's a bunch of war stories here. Let me touch on a couple here. Nestle with Nespresso is a good example. Nestle for years tried to run Nespresso as a division of the mothership, and it was just basically going nowhere. They finally put the team on the edge and said, okay, go run separately away from the core functionality of the organization, and boom, it's now a $6 billion line of business, and you pretty much don't have a hotel room anywhere without an espresso machine anymore. But maybe Walmart is the most instructive model here. About 10 years ago, Walmart realized that you had to compete with Amazon. You know, that this e-commerce thing was not a fad. So in 2005, 2006, they set up a team in Bentonville and said, all right, we have the best inventory distribution logistics systems in the world. Let's go defeat Amazon. And they set up this team, but within 18 months, the immune system had killed it, okay? The existing executive said, well, we should be optimizing for our own stores. Look at that PE ratio, Amazon will never succeed, etc. So they did it a second time. And the second time they did it, they put the team at the edge and said, all right, go stay away from the core so we don't mess with you, but still use our existing systems because we have the best in the world. And again, the traditional mindset in most big companies is we should leverage these assets that we have, right? And so the team started off again the second time. 18 months later, it was dead because the business found out about it and set about killing it. So they did it a third time. And very courageously, this third time, they set up a team away from the core organization and made the amazing decision to say, go build your own inventory distribution, etc., even though we have the best in the world, because we've got to figure this out. It actually started to succeed that third time, except the business got excited, pulled it back in, killed it too early, right? And it was on iteration number 4, they did it independently, separately, and only after it achieved critical mass did they start stitching the back ends together. And so that's great. And now it's actually successful, and now it's the number 3 online retailer in the country after Amazon and Apple, etc. But in that intervening 8 years, Amazon is gone and is so far ahead that it's going to be impossible to catch up, right? And so we have this challenge of addressing legacy organizations in all of our organizations. Maybe Blockbuster is another fascinating example. In 1999, Reed Hastings from Netflix went to the CEO of Blockbuster and said, hey, I'd like to work with you. I'd like to have a partnership with you. We can add a component to your business that's online DVDs. And the CEO said to him, who the hell are you? I have every family in the country coming into a Blockbuster on a Friday. They buy confectionery, they get their movies, etc. This means nothing to me. A few years later, he realized he'd made a terrible mistake. And so he actually, to his credit, went back to Reed and said, okay, I'd like to cut a deal with you. And his board stopped him. The board of Blockbuster said to the CEO, you're bigger than they are, go beat them. And 2 years later, they were bankrupt, right? And this is, again, old world versus new world mindset. Now, we are starting to see some successes. Here's Microsoft doing an unbelievable job of transitioning from a product service to a subscription model. Here's a company creating vertical farms. This is actually IKEA. So they're taking their traditional capability and going into totally an adjacent space. That vertical structure, by the way, will feed a whole neighborhood sustainably, interestingly enough. Of course, you don't want to be around when they've finished building it with all the extra parts that are left over, but really interesting to see their model and where they're going. Nestle is now getting into personalized diets for DNA, and Corona is spending $4 billion on marijuana. Clearly, there's a business model in messing with people's brains, and therefore go full down that charge. But we can see people now experimenting at the edge and going to adjacent spaces pretty aggressively, and that's going to be the big challenge for retailers. How do you find those adjacent spaces? And I think the big question is, where is the money in this future? You know, already we see the difficulty of Amazon workers. If you're doing grocery deliveries in the UK or so on, each grocery delivery is costing the retailer about $40 or so. And so it's actually, they're spending a lot of money and they don't have that money. Amazon has a huge market cap and can afford to lose money for a while it figures it out. What we've been doing is running a 10-week sprint with big organizations to solve what I call this immune system problem. We piloted this with Procter & Gamble a few years ago. We've now run it a dozen times, and we're actually open sourcing it. So we now created a 10-week process that allows you to move your leadership, culture, management thinking 3 years ahead in 10 weeks. And we've released it in the form of a book. It's a manual on how to run this process. So let me pause there. I've covered a whole bunch of different areas. Happy to get into the stuff around retail and other areas. Adarsh, back to you for a minute.
Thank you for that, Salim. Really great. Okay, so let's jump into Q&A, but I'm going to encourage this time our attendees to please be forthcoming with questions. We have a Q&A little tab here on Zoom, so feel free to ask questions, and rather than me driving the conversation. Otherwise, I'm getting more out of this than you are. But anyways, so I'll kick off with the discussion. So Salim, you know, great advice and also an approach on how to think about innovation within this space. But something maybe from my own experience is as a retailer or having been in retail, there's a strong awareness that things are changing, but things still have a way to go. And you mentioned that this disruption you expect to see pretty dramatically over the next 10 years. So what's the kind of advice on retail right now, where let's take a large retailer, they still have to invest in capital right now, refresh stores, make the retail experience exciting. And while they don't want to over invest in retail, in order to get that attention on the high street away from other retailers who are also becoming a bit more experiential, they have to stand out. So it's kind of this tough inflection point that they're at, where they still have to spend money to be interesting, but at the same time, over the long term, start to divert funds away from this area. What are your thoughts on this?
No, you're exact. I think you've hit it on the nail on the head. As more money goes online, right, the margins drop quite a bit. The overall top line drops, and when you have the top line dropping, then it puts a downward spiral on everybody. Now everybody's having to spend money to keep the same shrinking headspace. On top of that, I think maybe the one other dynamic that I forgot to mention is that we've got the supply side breaking down. With companies like Zara and others, we're doing this rapid turnaround, right? And teenagers and young kids are much more interested in that. If your product has been around for 6 to 8 months, it's just not interesting. And so you've got a double-edged sword hitting you in a lot of these areas. And I think it used to also be the conventional wisdom that you could put some things online, right? But things like shoes, forget, you're never going to put shoes online because of the customization around it. But totally Zappos has blown that out of the water. And now pretty much, I'll go back to the idea that the online store is basically a showroom, which is what I think Amazon's going to end up being. Amazon Go and some of their online capabilities, they're testing the cute retail experience. But really what you're going to end up with is that kind of model. There's no question in saying closed retailing, you'll end up with some sort of sharing. You already have models like Rent the Runway, where I can basically go online and do this. By the way, as a side note, Rent the Runway, which has a subscription model to nice clothing, which a box arrives every month type of thing, and then you return it when you're done with it. It's the biggest dry cleaning operation in the world. Because every time they turn this over, so they've actually gone into a whole side business, which is dry cleaning around this. I honestly don't know what happens to the future of retail around this. It's a pretty difficult model to be in right now.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Totally. And I guess just expanding on that point, I was looking at, I mean, if you take a P&L for a retail business, there's rent, there's staff, and, if you then compare it to a new business, while marketing spend might be comparable, but then being spent in different areas, a digital business is mainly spending its marketing money digitally. But the sense I get is, there's more capacity for digital spending these digital businesses where they don't have to spend on rent, they don't have to spend on staff. So actually, you could even argue that the amount of dollars that are being spent on digital marketing by online companies is lower than they should be. So there's even more of a threat. How would you sort of compare this and sort of wake up traditional retailers to this threat?
Well, here's the key insight that we got from the book Exponential Organizations. And the key insight is, what is making these new organizations tick? How are they getting such crazy market caps? Are they justified? Are we back in the safe spaces to say, oh, we're back in the 1998, 1999 time of the boom, and it's all going to collapse in a horrible mess, right? But it's different this time, and I'll tell you why. When you're running a business, you worry about demand and supply, right? Very specifically, what's the cost of demand, what's the cost of supply, and hopefully on the right side of the equation. What the internet did for us for the first time in the history of business, it allowed us to drop the cost of demand exponentially. Online marketing, referral marketing, every Silicon Valley company is going for the viral loop. If you can do that, your acquisition costs actually go to zero, right? So that's pretty cool. You can acquire customers at zero cost. That's a magical thing to be able to do. And so you saw the first decade of the 2000s as people learning how to do marketing online and getting their marginal cost of acquisition down very, very dramatically. But what's interesting about this new breed of organizations that we call EXOs is they've figured out how to drop the cost of supply exponentially, right? Airbnb's marginal cost of adding a room to their inventory is almost zero. Whereas if you're Hyatt, you have to build a hotel, right? Same with traditional retailers. Their marginal cost of increasing supply is very high. Whereas if you're an online retailer, you throw up a website and off you go, right? And that's an existential threat. I'll tell you a quick story. In our very, very first summer in 2009, in our summer program at Singularity University, we had a lecture on entrepreneurship. And David Rose, who's from The Quote, who's one of the godfathers of angel investing, did this talk about how quickly, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the hour, this student puts up his hand and he goes, yeah, I think I just did it. And they're like, what'd you do? So this kid in 1 hour threw up a website called barbershopcoupons.com, bought a bunch of Google ads, and reached a bunch of barbershops who said, hey, if you want to offer a coupon, we can give you a discount. And by the end of the hour, it was generating revenue. Okay? Registered the URL, threw up a web page, offered a coupon, had people sign up, and was generating revenue within an hour. Okay? The marginal time capability of that, where it takes years to get a retail store up and running, is not, you can't deal with that. You can't compete with that. So the thing to do is embrace it heavily and figure out how to deal with it. And many people are doing that, but rather than embracing it and transforming it and leaping to a new level, they're basically putting their inventories online, right? And saying, okay, here, it's a different channel. And now the big question is multi-channels and so omni-channel retailing and so on. But that's not the answer. The answer is, what does the business model look like that will have you grow 10x in the future, right? And that's the inquiry. And having that inquiry in a traditional environment where people are having to meet their quarterly numbers is a very, very difficult proposition. And I think that's where a lot of the stress is coming from. So people keep doing more of the same, but you're basically about to run off a cliff and you're just running faster.
Yeah. No, it's really, really interesting, actually. I mean, the next question I have is around the difference in the capital base of retail versus other industries that have faced disruption, and how easy it is to let go of that. I think, I mean, when we're talking in the context of retail, I mean, we're considering, it's not like a car rental company where they have leases on cars where, they lost a year. I mean, you're talking about 20-year leases, 25-year leases, long-term sort of assets that they own and have invested in. While some of these companies may embrace change, like you've suggested, by having completely separate innovation happening alongside. What are your thoughts on the actual reality of them being able to sort of distance themselves from a traditional business? Because that's where I see it as really like, it's almost like fundamentally different, facing fundamentally different challenges to other industries.
Yeah, I would liken it to the enormous challenge that the car rental companies face, right? So it turns out car rentals is not a operating business of any kind. The operating side of the car rental business makes no money. It's basically a fleet management play. So when you can have a whole 6,000 cars that you buy en masse at a much lower price, you let people rent it for a couple of years, then you sell it on the secondhand market. That's where you get the money. Whereas the car rental thing is just an excuse to amass a large number of cars. And I think the inverse is true in the retail. You aggregate all this capability, you open up a whole bunch of stores, and then you're relying on the transactional cost in the store to make the numbers work over a long term. And it doesn't apply when the internet is hurtling towards you like a bullet train. And so we've got enormous challenges. I think there will be a transformation where the suburbs will become more interesting. Here's the couple of bright spots that I do see. As people want experiences rather than products, and we really like to be collectively, we as human beings, we like to herd. And so people like to get together because it gives them referential kind of insight as to who they are, right? I think shopping malls are one of the biggest areas where people kind of just get a sense of who each other is and what each other's doing. And you see, despite the lack of the drop in retail transactions, shopping malls are busier than ever. You can't get a damn parking spot in any shopping mall pretty much anywhere in the world, which is great at one level. It's just the spend per square foot is dropping like a stone. So there's some time to figure out how can you leverage that. Now, there's only so many Starbucks retail outlets you can have in a shopping mall, right? So I think there'll be a profusion of other things like 3D printing on demand and other services like manicures and pedicures and other things that will start to happen. And we can see airports basically being turned into shopping malls, right? That's another big dent as people travel more. And as people spend less on other things, you have actually more discretionary income. And so there's some interesting bright spots, but I think finding the sweet spot between what's the business model of the new while dealing with decaying capital costs and infrastructure of the old is very, very challenging. It's one of the most interesting business transformations and difficult ones that I've seen in many, many years.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. I think it's a really interesting topic you talk about. I mean, the change that you're describing in malls is, I think, led by a need for that sense of community, which people still have, but also, call it engagement, entertainment. I mean, it's services that are starting to crop up. And we've got some examples. I mean, Nike is an interesting example, Lululemon, who are organizing their touch points as gatherings of community, but also around activity and other forms of engagement, not just retail. So I think that's going to drive quite an interesting change. But definitely, I mean, real estate and retail, the high street itself is massively going to change. I think in years to come. Let's see if I've got any questions. Okay, no, I'll follow on with one more question that I'm quite interested in. We are what I opened with was a comparison of e-commerce spend in the US to the total retail spend. Now, while there is access, it hasn't reached near an amount that is near the total. But what I'm really excited about is you mentioned all these exponential technology verticals that we have. Can you give us some examples of where and how you see the change, like lifting the total e-commerce spend from where it is now to really making a massive dent in total retail? So one example, that comes to mind for me is, you talked about Zappos and shoes. I mean, once you start 3D scanning people's bodies, I mean, retailers can easily make an access like, designer suits, shoes, glasses, which is an industry I've been in. I'd love your thoughts on other real exponential sort of change that you think will help leapfrog this amount.
I think there's a few things that Cesar will talk about blockchain and Bitcoin and so on, which allows us to fractionalize more and more things, right? And I think that'll be an interesting capability. But I think the big challenge is going to be that the categories of things that we sell in the way that we sell them is transforming. Just as an example, and I'm talking about the US and in specific, is there's a huge amount of retail that goes through gas stations. Okay, like 25% of all cigarettes are sold at gas stations, for example. Okay, in the next 5 years, it will make no sense to buy a combustion engine car. Within 5 years. So within 5 years, like my wife has already declared she will never go into a gas station again because we have a Tesla now, and she's done. Like it'll never happen. So we're going to see the channels kind of starting to have major pockmarks in them in a very short order, right? Now, if you do that, plus the online experience, each of us has, Marcus Shingles, who's the CEO of XPRIZE, does this great example where he says, look, if you go into my closet, 90% of the clothes aren't worn 90% of the time. And if you could rent those out, there's going to be some model where I can have those rented and dry cleaned or borrowed or whatever. Then you really radically change the equation without actually getting into a retail store environment. I'm using clothing in that instance, but the same applies to lots of different areas. For example, let's say you have drones in prevalence, okay? Every single household in the US and certainly in the Western world has a drill and screwdrivers and tools at home, right? Well, okay, I want to do some handiwork. What if a drone shows up for the afternoon with a carpentry box of what I need, and then it takes it away at the end of the afternoon, right? I suddenly don't need to own and host and house these things. There's a lot of things that we use very, very episodically in our houses, but we all have one.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be a massive transformation over time with new delivery mechanisms. So, for example, we have a colleague who's just testing delivery bots, which is basically a little shopping cart delivery robot on wheels that delivers stuff at night. Right? And then if you can do that, you take trucks off the streets during the day, and anything can be delivered. And therefore, when you can drop the delivery cost because the cost of the driver is 90% of the cost, huge implications for that.
No, really, really interesting. I guess for me, a summary is that it's not just the impact of access that people have online that will dramatically change this. It's also, as you kind of have given some examples, there's parallel changes happening. Like, for example, the Tesla example, if gas stations are a channel that people access right now to sort of buy products, they won't be accessing that channel the way they do at the moment. So it's really important to also think about, concurrent changes that are happening, in different areas through various technology verticals, I guess, is a summary. Why don't we move on to welcome Cesar to help us understand how blockchain is impacting this space. Over to you, Cesar.
Yeah, sure. Let me share my presentation first. The idea here is to help us understand, how much of what's going on blockchain is really an opportunity and how much is really a hype. And we are going to be focusing on retail today, following, the initial conversation. So as Salim was explaining, we are really moving from the internet as we know it into something that is called the Internet of Value. And the smartphones and the blockchain are going to be the key enabler of that. And then in parallel, we are also seeing all this IoT moving forward and the Internet of Things. A lot of that also happening because all the changes that are coming in the energy sector. But today we are going to talk more about this Internet of Value and how what is that and how is that impacting the retail. So let's start a little bit about blockchain, explaining what is blockchain. And more than going in the technology, it's important to understand why blockchain is important. And the key is that the blockchain solves the problem of trust. So when a group of people has to work together to get an objective, and you can use this technology to make sure that everybody is aligned, that nobody is lying, that nobody is playing different games, we can get much more things. We can gain new value from the ecosystem. We can create new economies. We can get objectives together, even if we are competitors. And of course, when we look this from the perspective of trading and retail, we can do trading anywhere in the world, and trading for the wider concepts of buying and selling products anywhere in the world with anyone, even though if we don't know the person. So that's very important. Today we go to places where we know, places that they have a warranty and they've been doing business in a good way for many years. But now with all this online movement going on and the new technology, we will see how we can do trading and commerce, buying and selling with anybody, anywhere. So the things that enable the blockchains, they could be some public databases, or they can be private, they can be platform, they can be software. But the important concept is that with blockchain, we are solving the problem of trust. And that's at the core of what trading is. So blockchain is basically a distributed ledger, a distributed database that is immutable, that is shared. So instead of what we know today, let's put the example of the banks, where we have all our accounts, but all the database is with the bank. We are going to have a distributed network where each of us will have that database, and then that will eliminate the intermediaries, and it will be giving power to the people. So that database is shared, and that's secure, because I didn't mention in the previous slide, but something important to understand about blockchain is, from technology perspective, is that the combination of two things. One side, all the development in cryptographic, and the other side of the development on decentralized and distributed databases. When those two things are combined in a creative way, then we have blockchain, which is the technology that is solving the trust problem. And as I say, they are also distributed. So this is a very high level what the blockchain is. And what I want to mention now is how that's changing businesses. So we know platform economies and things like Facebook or Google, but they are moving into the sharing economy. So in the platform economy, as Saline explained, the cost of demand is going down. In the sharing economy, also the cost of offering is going down. In the peer-to-peer economy, what we get is the possibility for each of us to trade and to generate relationship with somebody else anywhere with the trust. So the benefit of this system, which is secure and decentralized, is that it creates first efficiencies. Also, we can do it in a way that is private and secure. Then we can do it much faster, and we can save costs and generate new value, which is very important. It's not just about the cost. Initially, many projects start for the cost, but if you do it right and you tokenize the whole model, you will exploit new values, opportunities that we're not able to do before. So another important concept to understand is the creation of the smart contracts. Blockchain basically is known as the technology behind Bitcoin, which is a currency for buying and selling products. But the next killer application was the smart contract. So this smart contract is basically a contract that is written in code, in computational code. This is an example of a contract right in the Ethereum platform in Solidity. And it looks a little bit difficult, but it's gonna be easier and easier as we develop. So we are in the early stages, and yes, and somehow it's very technological driven yet, but people is working all over to make it easier and easier. So that contract is written, that contract is put in the blockchain, so it's secure in the blockchain. And when a trigger happens, the contract execute. And then there is no discussion of, yeah, the contract is gonna happen or it's not gonna happen. So it brings a lot of trust and enable many transactions, which are very important for retail. So all this is impacting many different industries radically. So it started with the digital currency, as I say. Bitcoin was the first one, but after that, there are many ones solving problems in the e-commerce space, global payments, remittance, peer-to-peer lending, microfinance, etc. Then the smart contract were developed, and that's the second killer application, as I say, and then solving problems like digital rights, fiducias or trust and escrow accounts. So all that is part of it. What is coming strongly now days, and I believe is going to be very important in the next year, are the security. So now we are seeing that the tokens and the blockchain are used to tokenize securities. So people started to tokenize equity in markets like, for example, Delaware. It's now possible for you to securitize your company. Then we will see also securitization of real estate. We are seeing companies in crowdfunding also moving into this direction. So this area about security is also very important. And then finally, record keeping. So everything related to how I keep track of my records, how I make sure that a product, for example, is what it is. And we will talk more about it in the next sample, which are related to retail, like provenance. All that will be solved with this part of the record keeping. So ownership, my medical records, my voting capabilities and voting power, all that could be used and decentralize and generate trust in the blockchain. So the key thing about all this, how you move it into the business. So to do that, the important point is tokenize your business. And what makes the difference between what is hype in blockchain and what is real is when you are able to really tokenize something that exists. So for example, if you tokenize an asset that's easy to understand, so it has a value behind it, so nobody's going to be running. When you tokenize a business that is already running and is real and is happening, so you have that thing and that something is not a hype, it's real. If you have an economy, as for example, Salim that created his exponential organization economy, and you have that community, you can create that community and you can allow value exchange in something that is real. So those kind of things really made the difference between what is hype and what is a real opportunity. Investors now are much more savvy than a year ago, and they are really looking deep into, okay, is something behind this offering, is something behind this that is real. It's not just a project that is going to be built, but it's something that is real. And that's how investors are approaching the new world of blockchain investments and tokenization. So let's go into the retail that I think will clarify many things. I pick here 4 examples of what blockchain are how blockchain is helping retail. And I will say I pick it in an order as I believe they are more advanced. So the consumer payments are really well into adoption and in some cases even beyond. The product verifiable record, this is in adoption. The B2B payment is something that is between pilots and adoption, and the digital advertising, this is still on pilots. But all this is happening and all this is impacting retail. So let's talk a little bit about consumer payments. So the consumer payments are important, mainly where high transaction costs constrain the market. And there are different cases. I have here a couple of examples. One is 10X. 10X, basically what they did is they have a crypto wallet and they have a card, a Visa card. And then they connected both. So basically it allows customers to use a Visa card in any retail that you accept Visa card, that I think are most of them about the world, at least in the developed world, and use their crypto money into there. So that's one thing that is happening, that's TX. Then we have Bitcoin. So we have the application of Bitcoin checkouts. Basically, there are restaurants or retailers that are categorizing BitPay, which is the solution here, this payment solution, as an authorization-free credit payment type. So basically, retailers around the world are allowing people to use this mechanism, which is BitPay, which is a wallet in your cell phone, to pay the services, the product with Bitcoin. So customer payments are there. And there are companies that has been leading and accepting cryptocurrency and Bitcoin for over a year now. Overstock is one of them. And now recently Overstock even announced that they are changing the business model from the online retailer to become a pure blockchain company and reinventing themselves. So they are finding as their own space, and they want to go more into pure blockchain business than the retail business. We have New Web also in Canada. We have Subway, we have Microsoft, so services, products, foods, or online retailers. There are many companies already accepting crypto. So the customer payments is happening and is beyond the early adoption. That's the first thing, and that's something as a retailer for you to think about. What are you going to be doing? The second application here is related to provenance of your products. And this is the next most developed area in the blockchain space for retailers. So we have different cases. The first one is logistics, that basically bring visibility of where your products are anytime during the whole supply chain. And that's very important for inventory management. Then we have traceability and provenance that basically allow you to, in a trusted way, let people know where the product is coming from. If I sell vegetable, for example, I don't have to trust the retail anymore that those vegetables are from organic and they are near to where I'm selling the product, or they are grow near where they are selling the product. It will be all in the blockchain, and it will be all public, and it will be all secure and immutable. So that's very important. And actually, I have this example here with Walmart that is already announcing that they are asking their providers to use blockchain to trace problems with the quality in the value chain, in the supply chain. So that's something that is happening. Also, there are authenticity and anti-counterfeiting. So this is happening mainly in high-value products. It started with diamonds, but now many others are adopting that. It's very popular also with art and collectibles, and it's coming into more and more mainstream. Then the proof of ownership and resale. So that's also very important for all the commercial processes. The warranty of products are also going into blockchain. The loyalty programs are all going into blockchain. The other example I have here is Mogix. It's a company that is doing the traceability and the visibility of products. And this is in collaboration with Microsoft, and it's been already implemented in different customers. So again, this is another thing that is happening in the market. It's not as developed as the payment, but it's happening. And here I brought the example from Mogix, Microsoft, and Walmart to show that. The other piece is the B2B payments. It's useful to separate financial and the documentation of flow. So basically allow less paperwork, more digital exchange of information, a smoother transition across borders and across multiple parties. So when I do import exports, this is very, very helpful. So the retailers and the suppliers, they interact in many different ways. All these things are very much transaction driven, and all those things will be automatized with this new database called blockchain. And all the intermediaries that are playing between the suppliers and the retailers, like for example, the logistic companies, they are going to be in a high risk of their business being totally disrupted, because the smart contracts, as I explained before, will allow to automatize many of these flows, both in the financial and the documentation flow, generating less cost for suppliers and retailers. The last one I got for today is on the digital advertising. And as I say, this is the less developed, but basically the privacy of blockchains is finding very effective ways for corporations without all the invasion that we are having from digital advertising. So this is back to the peer-to-peer concept that I explained before, and also related to problems we got here about centralized databases that are being hacked, for example. So the data of the customer will stay with the customers, and basically I can be private and I can still be, impacted by advertising, or I can still have the benefit of advertising. So I will say that in that way. So we have Matt High, which is a project that is actively working on this. And on the right side, we have a company in Spain. It's called Global Accelerator. It's an agency, marketing agency that became a lead generation agency. And now is decentralizing the whole model. Doing all this lead generation in a decentralized platform. So very interesting, and people can monetize their leads, and companies can also monetize the leads that are unused leads. So the digital advertising is also happening. After all this, the question is, what can we do? After I reflect on this, what's going to be my next steps? So at Fluid, we facilitate transformational blockchain projects, and we're happy to engage with anybody that is interested. We have a way of working that has been successful. We have applied this to 10 different projects around the world. I'm happy to talk and discuss. The lessons learned from today, I would say, is 4 things. The first thing is that definitely the technology is not mature. We are in an early phase of the technology, and there is a risk and there is an opportunity. And that's true for people that decide to invest, but it's also true for people that decide to start experimenting. But then on the other side is a reality. You saw all the examples, brought different industries. You saw the examples, particularly in blockchain. And it's very important for everybody, not only in the retail, but any industry, to understand the implications and connect with projects in the industries, so you can really see and learn what's going on. The third thing is you have to create an experimentation plan for blockchain, but also for some of the other exponential technologies that Salim explained. And finally, to make sure that you are doing something that is not just hype, but is real exponential and make the difference. One of the key things is that you need to tokenize a real business, a real asset, a real ecosystem. And that's what made the difference between a hype project or a real opportunity. So with that, I think we can go into Q&A. Happy to stay a little bit longer and answer any of your questions.
Great. Cesar, thank you so much for that. That was a very, very comprehensive kind of summary and guide of how blockchain can really impact and will be impacting this space. I'm grateful for that. Thank you. I guess the key message I'm getting from your presentation was that the transactional sort of mode of the world is undeniably going to be adopting kind of this type of architecture, because I mean the benefits and the kind of uses to all stakeholders are just so dramatically sort of transformational compared to our existing form of money, which just facilitates exchange. I mean, it's just got so much security, supply purposes. I mean, but you also summarize at the end that we're at such an early stage. So, I mean, in terms of how businesses start to even think about this, let's just say even a new business that's entering retail from scratch, so it's just a digital business, how do they need to be thinking about blockchain today? So like, let's use that example, if we may. If it was an existing business that's setting up a new kind of innovation arm or a new business entirely, how should they be thinking about their business in a blockchain context from scratch?
Yeah, I think the Overstock example is a good case. to review. So Overstock was one of the first retailers, online retailers that jump into the world and open up for customers to buy stuff using cryptocurrencies. They learn about it and they understood, the change that this will generate in the space. And they are closing the online retail now, and they are moving full into becoming a blockchain company. So the path for every company will be different. But the message I want to pass here is that if you close the door and you do nothing, you will not learn. And then you will have no clarity what's going to happen with you, how you're going to be disrupted, and what can you be doing next. So the first thing is definitely early on, but is, as I said in the quote in that slide, it's better to fight 5 years ahead than 5 minutes late. Because as Nadine explained, this is exponential. And once the exponential curve hit, you are not going to catch up. So that will be, my answer to your question. So it's definitely about trying. And then the second part is I bring some examples. So the first one is payment. Definitely that's key. The second is provenance. So if it's something more for your core development, I will be looking to these two opportunities.
So let's talk a bit about that. I mean, I think, for payment, that's the obvious one, which you can access quite easily by accepting crypto. But just talking more about, I mean, you gave an example of a company that is helping businesses tokenize themselves to then have, provenance and more accurate kind of supply chain monitoring and even beyond that. Can you give us an example of a business, namely a retailer, that has already embraced this tokenization of its product and assets that we can get our heads around?
Yeah, the example I think you are referring is the Mojix.
Yes,
that's correct. So they are starting now with provenance and logistics and supply chain. So basically, and they are working with retailers in the fashion space. So if you go to a store or you buy it online, now they have in the blockchain, they have certified the origin of those materials, if they are organic, if they are not organic, if they are built in a farm that hire young people or really quality workers. So all that is there, and all the traceability of the product is with the product. So basically, the retailers that are using their solution, they don't have to do marketing and people to believe that what they are saying is true about the product or the manufacturers. They don't have to do that. It's all in the blockchain, and nobody is gonna say, okay, this is not true, or it is there and it's something that you cannot change. And all the traceability of the product is there. There are another example also with the liquors that is very important. In many markets, people used to open it, change the content, and generate very big problems. So the traceability for liquor is something also that is happening. I know, for example, in Latin America, companies doing this, particularly in Peru. And I know some projects also doing this kind of things in Russia and the East, West Europe. There are some examples and some retailers implementing traceability for alcohol.
Yeah, okay. And where are we? I guess the answer was earlier on, later on in your presentation. What I mean by that is, I'm just thinking about the total stakeholder pool that have to embrace blockchain technology for it to then become critical. We're far away from that inflection point, but in the example that you've just given, say with a fashion retailer, going as far back as the origin of material, these are farms, these might be, quite small businesses. What's involved with, every stakeholder in the chain needing to embrace the system, or is it just down to the retailer? And, I think many years down the line, it'll almost be a common practice that, everyone, including suppliers, will be offering this to retailers that they want to work with to say that they will be compliant with, a blockchain architecture. But how does that all, how does everyone in this fit together? Because
That's a very important question because it's key to differentiate the projects, the different projects that you can find in the blockchain space. So you can do a pure technological blockchain project to optimize your processes. And it has nothing to do with tokenization, a new economy, a new business. You are just updating your technology. So that's one piece. The other piece is, as I explained, if you are part of a consortium and you get together even with your competitors and with your vendors and with your logistic supply chain providers, all together in an ecosystem, and you build a blockchain about it and it's still private, it will allow everybody participating to know exactly what's going on and to have trust and unlock new opportunities that are not available today. So an example of this, a project that I was involved and is happening, is in the fish market. So US has, and many countries around the world has new regulations about fish and the content of minerals that are in fish or where the fish were caught, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole industry get together and they create a blockchain to track exactly where the fish is coming from. And this is something that they are doing ahead of many countries doing the regulation. Same thing is happening with meat. So that's why what Walmart announced about, asking their vendors to certify their products in the blockchain is something that is going to come more and more as regulations develop, but also as customers or retailers see the opportunities to provide a better service at lower cost. So just to summarize the question, I think the key point is there is an opportunity to get integrated industries and to solve problems that we were not able to solve before.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I think private blockchains have massive benefits for within those little ecosystems. So final question I'll ask, just conscious of time, and this is relating to the end customer. Now, while small ecosystems can be tied up within a blockchain architecture, as you've described, help us understand what this means for actual customers, where if they are actually part of those private blockchains, because I can imagine that it will be challenging for customers to feel the need to be tapped into or be able to access this whole loop by having to be part of individual blockchains as opposed to a kind of more open blockchain architecture that products may sit on. Help us understand this, because and maybe I'm not articulating it well, but I hope I've conveyed it well.
Yeah, let me see if I understood. So if I'm a customer today, and I'm going to buy something I go to places that I know. If I go online, I go to places that I know that they have high referrals, and that's how I'm doing business. Now with blockchain, I will be able to do business with anyone in the blockchain, and I have the trust that if that person is in the blockchain, it's not gonna happen something wrong. So basically it will open to me opportunities for peer-to-peer engagement that they were not available before. And then all the intermediation in the middle disappear. So as a consumer, I can get a lot of benefits. As a retailer, I will be in problems, not with all the products initially, but with some products, and every time with more and more products, because that intermediary tend to disappear.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think it definitely benefits there. Okay, I think this is I could go on for ages. I'm so passionate about this space as you are, and fascinating to see how this is going to unfold. It's one of the verticals within this whole space of retail that we've touched on this week. So Cesar, thank you for that. And also thank you to Salim, who's had to leave us. He had to dash off for another call. And I guess I'm going to close this this call. And I wanted to thank all of you that attended the call. If you have any other questions, I know the questions were a bit quiet from our audience. Please do not hesitate to email them to paloma@widerpool.com. And then also just to reiterate that if you are interested in working with Cesar Salim's organization, with the exponential scaling thinking, or even WiderPool, who can help with its Scout and Match program to help any business try and access different verticals within technology, whatever industry there are. Please put through any interest to paloma@widerpool.com, and we can follow up with you. Look out from us via email for the next calls and events that we will be hosting. This has been the fourth in a series of calls that we've had. So we look forward to continuing this with you. And if we don't speak before the Christmas and New Year period, I wish all of you the best holiday period, be it with friends, family, or associates. And yeah, thank you for the support this year. And I bring the call to an end now. So thank you very much.